This is Nauru, 8 square miles. Today, it survives on a very different business, hiding other people's money, and now, housing other countries' unwanted people. Roughly 12,000 people. In the 1970s, this country had the second highest income per person on Earth, behind only Saudi Arabia, the third smallest country on Earth. And this is the story of how it got rich, got reckless, and quietly became one of the strangest survival stories in the world. European sailors who first spotted Nauru in 1789 called it Pleasant Island. White beaches, coconut trees, a green central plateau. Nobody thought much of it until 1899, when a geologist named Albert Ellis noticed a strange rock propping open a door at a trading company in Sydney. It wasn't petrified wood, as everyone had assumed. It was phosphate, compressed seabird droppings, built up over thousands of years, and one of the most valuable ingredients in fertilizer on Earth. Germany, Britain, and Australia each took turns mining and administering the island through the early 1900s. Then came the Second World War, when Japanese forces occupied Nauru in 1942 and deported more than 1,200 Nauruans, most of the island's population, to forced labor camps on a distant island. Roughly a third of them never made it home. Survivors were finally repatriated after the war ended, returning to an island that had been bombed and half abandoned. It's difficult to overstate how much that experience shaped what came next. When Nauru finally gained independence in 1968, its leaders were determined that no outside power would ever again control the island's fate or its wealth. For a moment, that determination paid off. Newly independent and in full control of its own phosphate for the first time, Nauru became the richest nation on the planet, per person, behind only oil-rich Saudi Arabia. By the time of independence, more than 35 million metric tons of phosphate had already left the island under foreign administration. And now, finally, the profits would stay home. The money flowed fast. The government launched its own airline, Air Nauru, eventually flying jets to destinations across the Pacific, including Taipei and Guam, for a population of barely 7,000 people. There was no income tax. Education, healthcare, and transportation were all free. Officials imported supercars and chartered private planes. By 1975, at the peak of the phosphate trade, Nauru's wealth, held in a fund called the Nauru Phosphate Royalties Trust, was valued at well over $1 billion Australian dollars. Per person, Nauruans were sitting on wealth equivalent to roughly $500,000 US each in today's money. It was supposed to last forever. It didn't. The mining that created that wealth was also erasing the island itself. By the time the boom peaked, roughly 80% of Nauru's small landmass had been strip-mined into a moonscape of sharp limestone spikes, land so damaged that nothing could be grown on it again, not on any timescale that matters to a human life. In 1989, Nauru took the unusual step of suing Australia at the International Court of Justice, arguing that its former colonial administrator had failed to address the environmental destruction it caused. In 1993, the case settled, with Australia agreeing to pay reparations, funding a body called the Nauru Rehabilitation Corporation to restore the mined-out land. More than 3 decades later, only one section, grimly nicknamed Pit 6, has actually been rehabilitated. And it was developed not as farmland or housing, but as the site of Nauru's own prison. With the land running out, the plan was simple on paper. Invest the phosphate money so wisely that Nauru would stay wealthy long after the mining stopped. Instead, the trust was steered into a real estate portfolio scattered across the world, including Nauru House, a skyscraper in Melbourne once called the jewel of Nauru's overseas holdings. The country's public service ballooned to over 1,500 employees in a nation of fewer than 10,000 people, and government deficits reached 10 million Australian dollars a year through the 1990s. Then came the single strangest decision in the whole story. In the early 1990s, a Nauruan government advisor named Duke Minks, a former road manager for a minor 1960s British pop group, pitched Nauru's leadership on an unusual investment: financing a West End musical about a fictional romance between Leonardo da Vinci and the Mona Lisa. The government bought in for roughly $5 million. Leonardo the Musical, a portrait of love, opened at London's Strand Theatre in June 1993 to scathing reviews and closed within 5 weeks. Nauru lost nearly the entire investment. It wasn't an isolated mistake. Real estate holdings were sold off one by one to cover mounting debts. In 2004, Nauru House itself was sold to help repay a $240 million loan the government had taken out against its own overseas assets. Nauru's own government has been remarkably unstable through much of this story, cycling through frequent changes in leadership as different political factions fought bitterly over how to handle the country's shrinking wealth. A level of political turnover unusual even by the standards of small island nations. Facing bankruptcy, with phosphate nearly exhausted and its investments gone, Nauru's government found a new source of income that had nothing to do with mining at all. It turned itself into an offshore banking haven. The following year, Air Nauru's last remaining aircraft was seized by its American creditors after years of missed payments, leaving the country without a national airline entirely. Throughout the 1990s, anyone could establish a licensed bank in Nauru for as little as $25,000, with almost no other requirements or oversight. In 1998 alone, an estimated $70 billion in Russian criminal money is believed to have passed through Nauru's banking system. In 2001, the International Financial Action Task Force formally blacklisted Nauru as one of 15 non-cooperative countries in the global fight against money laundering. The following year, the U.S. Treasury designated Nauru a primary money laundering concern and imposed sanctions rivaling those placed on Iraq. Under that pressure, Nauru introduced anti-avoidance legislation in 2003 and began shutting down its shell banking sector. By the time the Financial Action Task Force removed Nauru from its blacklist in October 2005, the country had abolished all 400 of the shell banks it had once licensed, and the government closed the Bank of Nauru entirely the following year. Nauru also began selling something else entirely: diplomatic status and passports to people who had never set foot on the island for the right price. Buyers reportedly included individuals connected to Russian organized crime and even, according to later reporting, people linked to Al-Qaeda, an official government identity from a country most of the world couldn't find on a map. In 2001, Nauru found yet another use for its isolation, agreeing to host a detention center for asylum seekers on behalf of Australia in exchange for aid and processing fees. It was controversial and heavily criticized by human rights groups, but it became one of the island's few remaining reliable sources of income. The human toll of all of this has been severe. With its soil destroyed and farming impossible, Nauru became dependent on imported processed food. The traditional diet of fresh fish and coconut replaced almost overnight by cheap shelf-stable imports like Spam and turkey tails, fatty cuts that wealthier nations don't want. Today, Nauru has among the highest rates of obesity and type 2 diabetes ever recorded anywhere in the world, with roughly 1 in 10 Nauruans living with diabetes. The detention center arrangement with Australia has proven to be, financially, one of the only reliable things to happen to Nauru's economy in decades. The country has since been reinstated into the World Bank's high-income classification, due in large part to the revenue it now earns from hosting people other countries don't want, an almost complete reversal of how it earned that same classification the first time through phosphate, 60 years earlier. This story hasn't stopped unfolding. In September 2025, Nauru signed a new deal with Australia worth over $400 million, agreeing to permanently accept hundreds of non-citizens Australia's courts had ruled it could no longer detain, plus close to $70 million a year in ongoing costs. In the same period, Nauru began positioning itself as a hub for cryptocurrency regulation and triggered international rule changes by sponsoring a deep-sea mining company seeking permits in Pacific waters, a resource race that echoes uncomfortably, the one that made and then broke this island a century ago. Nauru's own president has publicly acknowledged the mistakes of its mining past, even as the government pursues this new extraction industry. An Australian National University economist studying the island put it simply, "You have to see Nauru's story as riches to rags to riches again, just to understand what's happening to it now." Nauru's story isn't only about phosphate running out. It's about what a small, isolated country does when it must reinvent its entire economy again and again. From a failed London musical, to laundered fortunes, to sold passports, to housing people no other nation wanted. Today, Nauru faces a new threat on top of all of it: rising sea levels, on an island that sits just a few meters above the ocean at its highest point. Every claim in this video is independently sourced. Full source list in the description. Every country has a secret like this one. We uncover them every week. Subscribe. The next one might be closer than you think.